Hi, it's Dr. Brody. Pop on some headphones and get ready to learn about psychology's origin story. This podcast is an additional Chapter 1 audio lecture and provides some historical context for the field of psychology and provides an overview of its origins, major contributors, and the evolution of the field over time. One of the most important ideas to understand from the beginning of the course is that psychology is a science. The audio lecture on research methods covers some of the main concepts on how psychologists ask and answer questions. This audio lecture focuses more on how our field came to be. So, ancient Greek philosophers asked thoughtful questions about the connections between mind and body. The methods employed to answer these questions, though, have changed. The advent of the scientific method provided a systematic way to actually answer the pressing questions about behavior and mental processes. So, while ancient philosophers asked questions about the relationship between the mind and body, psychologists developed observable and repeatable methods for studying those questions scientifically. As you read about the history of psychology, you should become familiar with key figures such as Wilhelm Wundt, who established the first psychology laboratory, and William James, whose work helped shape psychology in the United States. William James wrote the first textbook, The Principles of Psychology. He thought it would take 2 years, and it actually took 12. So don't ever feel bad about underestimating how long a project will take to finish. Something important to remember, though, is that traditional tellings of the history of psychology often leave out many important contributors. In particular, women faced significant barriers during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. At a time when women lacked many basic rights and opportunities, they were frequently excluded from laboratories, academic positions, publications, and professional organizations. Students, you should pay particular attention to psychologists such as Mary Whiton Calkins and Margaret Floy Washburn. Calkins was a student of William James. She completed all the requirements for the doctoral degree at Harvard, but she was denied the degree because she was a woman. It wasn't just exclusion at the institutional level, though. In the actual classroom, all of the men in her class with William James, the seminar, they walked out once she entered the classroom. Harvard tried to appease her with an undergraduate degree from its sister college, Radcliffe. Calkins basically said, no thanks, and refused this when she had actually earned a doctoral degree. Margaret Floy Washburn was actually the first woman to be granted a doctorate in psychology. Her graduate mentor was E.B. Titchener, who is one of the field's prominent and early scholars. But even though Titchener mentored her and recognized her intelligence and contributions to the field, he had created a group called the Experimentalists that explicitly barred women from joining. She was physically not allowed to join spaces where important research discussions were occurring. And so she really missed out on a lot. And she wasn't the only one. Many early women scholars wrote about how their exclusion from the experimentalists was affecting their ability to do work. So women of this era found it difficult and sometimes impossible to hold paid positions, and their marital status influenced things like hiring decisions. Despite facing discrimination and institutional barriers, these women made major contributions to the development of psychology and helped pave the way for future generations of scholars. Another fascinating historical figure is Alice Lee, whose work illustrates both the strengths and the limitations of science during this period. Working alongside Carl Pearson, statistician, and other researchers, Lee studied skull measurements, which was a common practice at the time. Many scientists use these measurements to support claims about the supposed intellectual superiority of certain groups. These arguments often reflected both scientific sexism and scientific racism. Alice Lee became skeptical of the conclusions that were being drawn from this skull size research, particularly those claims that men were intellectually superior to women. So she was mad and she decided to challenge these assumptions. So Lee analyzed published skull measurements and demonstrated the flaws in the reasoning being used by many of her contemporaries. So she basically rank ordered known men's skull sizes and said, hey, these are the smartest and these are the least smart. So, in doing so, she helped expose the weak scientific foundations of some of the sexist claims. At the same time, however, she did not consistently apply the same critique to racist, eugenicist assumptions of the era, illustrating how even researchers who are challenging one form of prejudice sometimes perpetuated other forms. So, this example highlights an important lesson for psychology. Scientific research is conducted by human beings who are influenced by the values, assumptions, and biases of their historical moment. Good science requires constant questioning, skepticism, and reevaluation of existing beliefs. The field has grown and evolved. Women now actually make up the majority of graduate psychology programs, and people of color represent about half of this graduate student population as well. Many changes in the field were hard fought, and throughout the audio lectures, you will hear featured spotlights on trailblazers whose contributions may have been overlooked in traditional tellings. I'll highlight these figures as a nod to our field's timeline, growth, and evolution to today. We now have dozens of subfields in psychology, and many of these subfields we will cover in the course. If you have curiosities about the human mind and behavior, just know that you are following in the tradition of the ancient Greek philosophers, the early psychologists in our field, and our most recent PhDs. Enjoy the journey.